The central problem. There's a curious paradox in modern life. We live in an age with more technology, more comfort, and more access to information than any generation before us. And yet, millions of people live with anxiety, stress, and a mind that never seems to stop. Thoughts run constantly. The mind jumps between the past and the future. Regrets about what happened, worries about what might happen. But very rarely do we truly experience the present moment. And this is exactly the central theme of one of the most influential spiritual books of recent decades, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. In this book, Tolle presents a profound and transformative idea. Much of human suffering does not come from reality itself. It arises from our excessive identification with the mind and with our thoughts. And the key to inner freedom is learning to return to the present moment. In this video, we will explore some of the central ideas of this book and understand how they can transform the way we live. But before we begin, if you enjoy content about great books that expand consciousness and develop the mind, consider subscribing to the channel. Welcome to Mind Evolution Library. Now, to better understand where these ideas come from, it's worth looking briefly at the story of the author himself. The author. Eckhart Tolle was born in Germany and spent part of his youth in England. For many years of his life, he lived in a state of deep anxiety and inner suffering. He himself describes spending much of his youth struggling with negative thoughts and intense emotional discomfort. Until, at the age of 29, something extraordinary happened. One night, in a moment of deep despair, he had a realization that would completely change his life. A thought appeared in his mind. I cannot live with myself any longer. Then he noticed something curious. If I cannot live with myself, then there must be two selves. Who is the I, and who is the myself? This question opened a profound shift in his perception. He realized that there is a difference between the mind that thinks and the awareness that observes the thoughts. From that moment on, he entered a deep state of inner peace. For years, he lived a simple life, reflecting on consciousness, presence, and spirituality. Later, he wrote The Power of Now, a book that would become a global bestseller and a modern reference in practical spirituality. From this experience of transformation, Eckhart Tolle began to develop some fundamental ideas about the mind, human suffering, and consciousness. And it is precisely these ideas that we will now explore.
The first and perhaps most important idea of the book is this: you are not your mind. Most people believe they are what they think, but thoughts arise and disappear constantly. They change, they pass, they come and go. If you observe carefully, you will notice that something exists beyond thoughts. There is an awareness that observes thoughts. The moment you notice a thought, you are no longer completely identified with it. That small space between awareness and thought is the beginning of inner freedom. But if we are not our mind, an important question arises. Why does the mind seem to have so much power over our experience of life? To answer this, Eckhart Tolle introduces a fundamental concept.
In the second idea, Tolle argues that the mind is constantly trapped in time. But there is an important distinction. There is clock time and there is psychological time. Clock time is necessary. It helps us plan tasks, organize commitments, and structure practical life. But psychological time is different. It appears when the mind becomes trapped in memories of the past or worries about the future. And it is precisely in this mental space that much of human suffering arises. According to Tolle, life happens only in the present moment. The past exists only as memory. The future exists only as imagination. Reality happens only now. When the mind gets lost in psychological time, it also begins to generate intense emotions, and this leads us to another central concept presented in the book.
The pain body. Eckhart Tolle describes something he calls the pain body. The pain body is an accumulation of emotional suffering stored within us. Past experiences, emotional wounds, situations that were never fully processed. At certain moments in life, this pain body becomes active. When this happens, we may feel anger, sadness, anxiety, or emotional reactivity. The mind then creates stories to justify these emotions. But Tolle says there is something that can interrupt this cycle. When we bring awareness to these emotions, the pain body begins to lose its power. Awareness dissolves suffering. And this brings us to one of the most important teachings of the book.
Presence is the key to inner peace. The key to interrupting the cycle of mind and suffering is presence. But what does it really mean to be present? Presence means being fully aware of the moment that is happening right now, without being lost in the endless flow of thoughts, without being trapped in the past or projected into the future. When we are present, the mind no longer dominates our experience completely. It still exists, but it no longer governs our perception. Eckhart Tolle explains that the mind is an extraordinary tool. The problem arises when we become completely identified with it, when we believe we are what we think. Presence creates a small space between awareness and thought, and in that space, something important happens. Silence appears, clarity appears, and a sense of peace emerges that does not depend on external circumstances. Tolle suggests that this presence can be accessed in very simple ways. For example, by observing the breath, by feeling the body, by listening to the sounds around you. When we do this, attention moves away from the mental stream and returns to the direct experience of life. It is as if we step out of the mind and return to inhabiting the present moment. In this state, something interesting happens. Problems that once seemed enormous in the mind begin to lose their intensity, because much of human suffering does not exist in the present moment. It exists in the stories the mind tells about the past or the future. When we return to the now, many of those stories simply disappear, and what remains is something surprisingly simple: this moment. And according to Tolle, this moment is rarely as problematic as the mind tends to make it. That is why presence is described in the book as the gateway to inner freedom.
Acceptance dissolves suffering. Even when we intellectually understand the importance of presence, we often continue to resist what is happening. The mind has a constant tendency to judge the present moment. It says, "This should not be happening. I wish things were different." But this resistance creates inner tension. It is as if we are fighting against reality itself. Eckhart Tolle proposes a radically different approach: accept the present moment. Acceptance does not mean liking everything that happens, nor does it mean giving up or becoming passive. Acceptance means recognizing that this moment is already happening. When we stop resisting reality, something interesting happens. The energy that was used to resist becomes clarity. The mind becomes calmer. And from that calmness, more intelligent and creative responses often emerge. Tolle describes acceptance as aligning with life. Instead of fighting against the current of reality, we begin to move with it. And paradoxically, it is from this state of acceptance that true action becomes possible.
The ego is a mental construction. Another fundamental teaching of the book is the concept of the ego. According to Eckhart Tolle, the ego is the identity we construct from the mind. It is formed by thoughts, memories, beliefs, and personal stories. The ego constantly tries to define who we are. It says, "I am my job. I am my social status. I am my life story." But all these definitions are unstable. They depend on external factors that can change at any moment.
When something threatens these identities, the ego reacts with fear, defense, or conflict. That is why many human conflicts arise from the need to defend a mental identity. However, Tolle argues that there is a deeper identity, an identity that does not depend on roles or stories. This identity is the awareness that observes the experience of life. When we begin to notice this observing awareness, something shifts. The ego loses part of its power. We can still play our roles in society, professional, social, family, but we no longer need to identify completely with them. And this brings a sense of lightness. Life stops being a constant struggle to defend an identity.
Inner stillness. When identification with the mind begins to weaken, something new starts to emerge, a space of inner silence. Eckhart Tolle calls this space stillness. This stillness is not the absence of thoughts. It is the presence of a deeper awareness, an awareness that observes, that perceives, that simply is. This stillness is always available, but it is often hidden beneath the constant noise of the mind. We can notice it in simple moments, in the silence between two words, in the pause between two thoughts, in the feeling of being fully present while observing life. When we reconnect with this inner stillness, something profound happens. A peace appears that does not depend on external conditions. Life does not suddenly become perfect. Challenges still exist, but the way we relate to them changes. Stillness becomes an inner foundation, a quiet stability within us. And from this inner space, we can live with greater clarity, presence, and balance.
Practical application. There are some simple practices that can help bring more presence into daily life. The first is observing thoughts. During the day, pause for a few seconds and notice what your mind is thinking, without judgment, without trying to control, just observing. Another important practice is bringing attention to the body. Feel the breath. Feel your feet touching the ground. Feel the body in the present moment. This helps bring awareness back to the now. We can also practice something simple but powerful, accepting the present moment. When something difficult happens, ask yourself, can I allow this moment to be exactly as it is? Often, this small shift dissolves inner resistance. Finally, create small moments of silence during the day. Breathe, observe, notice the stillness. These moments strengthen presence.
In the end, the central message of the power of now is both simple and revolutionary. Much of human suffering does not come directly from life situations. It arises from the way the mind interprets and resists those situations. When we live completely identified with our thoughts, we become trapped in stories about the past and projections about the future. And in this constant movement, we lose contact with the only moment in which life truly happens, the present. Eckhart Tolle invites us to make a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of living inside the mind, begin living as the awareness that observes the mind. When we learn to observe thoughts, accept the present moment, and inhabit the now, something begins to change within us. The mind becomes quieter, emotions become clearer, and a sense of inner space appears. In that space, we discover something that was always there, a calm awareness, a silent presence, a form of peace that does not depend on external circumstances. And perhaps this is the greatest discovery proposed by the book. The peace we seek in the future is already available in the present moment. If you enjoyed this reflection on one of the most transformative books of modern spirituality, consider subscribing to the channel. Here at Mind Evolution Library, we explore the great books that expand consciousness, develop the mind, and transform the way we live. And remember, transformation begins when we return to the now.